Okay, this episode is number 2, and it's going to be expanding on the idea from season 1 with voting with your dollar. Now, there's a whole discussion here that I had with people, and it's interesting. So usually when I put up ideas or I throw up ideas at people, I sound like a fucking lunatic. And it's over time that I begin to make sense. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I'm already having the conversation or the internal narrative. And if the topic comes up, there's a lot of information going to come out of my head, or not necessarily information, not fact-based information, just assessments. I'll give you an example of this. So I just watched Joker 2, and I like the movie. That right there puts me at odds with the whole zeitgeist that's lit up right now. Because the zeitgeist is complaining about the movie. And I don't know if that is real. That's the problem with our society. Because what I watched, I liked. But at the same point in time, the more I keep thinking about what I watched, the more insight I have in regards to it. There's a lot of cinematic references. There's precedents set by other films that make this film work better. There's a lot of real life situations that this film kind of sort of addresses. And what's weird is I don't care about the ending of the film, because you could do a third sequel. And the problem with the third sequel is it would probably be another a set of films. It could be a trilogy, a 2-film structure, because it would be based on the back of this film. It would be something larger in scale and scope. Just to put it out there. The hate for this film is weird. Just is. It's a thing. And I don't understand why it's so weird. All I know is that it doesn't seem to be based on actually working through the film. I think this right here, in the larger argument of things, right? I'm sorry, I'm clicking on things. I don't have cards in front of me today, so I apologize for that. But I don't think it's based on their working knowledge about cinema or their interpretation of the material. I think the hate is showing their lack of understanding. That's how I look at the film. And so sometimes, what happens is that I find myself in discussions with people, and the narrative I already have is there. I'm already building an opinion. That's what you do. You build an opinion. You think about what you know and construct the idea. And your opinions always change. They're not fact, but they're based in facts or insights or working knowledge you might have from experiences or watching other material, right? So your opinion at 12 years old should not be the same opinion at 30. If it is, something's amiss. Okay, there's something off about that, right? It's like the book you read when you were 10, when you read when you were 18, you shouldn't have the same opinion. There should be different insights into that book. You should maybe have the same feel and emotion towards it, maybe even nostalgia, but don't mistake a nostalgia for educated, thoughtful opinion. It's not the same. Okay? You can love something for what it was, but it doesn't make it the end-all of end-all anymore. Or it might, depending on your changed opinion and your insight into the material. You might end up appreciating it even more and having more of a base for the argument. That's how it is. So when I throw stuff at people, it usually comes off sideways because it's a lot of information really quick. And a few younger guys were like, dude, I've never seen that. Don't know what you're talking about. And that changes everything. And I guess that's why they usually have like older people as wiser. I don't necessarily view myself as wiser. I just have a lot more experience with ingesting material over time. Like I remember certain things and I go back to revisit them like other pieces of fine art. So voting with your dollar. So capitalism is a social contract within our societal social construct. Payment for our time, which means that our time at some point has been quantified, made into a form of measurement. I don't think we naturally did this, right? I think this has been pushed upon us. You know, America versus America TM. And what's weird is we internalized it because that's how things are. And that's kind of important to note for later future argument, especially about the film industry. So I think the lowest two measurements I've seen ever when it comes to measuring money and time is the 60-minute clock, right? Time clock. Even worse, and even though it's probably measuring the same point, but the fact it can reduce your minute pay by doing this is the decimal clock, the 100-unit clock. So for shits and giggles, you can literally divide how much you're getting paid per hour by 100 and know how much you're getting paid per unit, which is fucking crazy. And it's like probably nothing. It's like a joke, right? It makes you feel small. It makes you feel like, God damn it, why do I even bother? And I don't think they give a fuck, right? All of this is sad, actually, because it implies that we are product. We are, but actually forcing us to face this as an implication is just too much, self-awareness. The idea that we're just fucking like part of the larger machine because somebody said we needed fodder, right? This is a conversation for another point. I'm not going to get into like the mechanics of this too much, but I want to know that your opinion, which was how I started this, and your time does give weight. Like what's strange about everything given to you is that you have power over it, even though you don't recognize it initially, right? So purchasing items or selecting where to spend your money is the workers / proletariat's direct day-to-day vote. Meaning that voting happens at a specific time, a specific day for, X amount of hours, you vote and tally everything up. The best voting is voter initiative, and we should have a lot more of that and more frequently. That's another argument, right? Another point. So, with that said, our decisions day to day, whether conscious or unconscious, to put money towards things, decides what we want to empower, what we want to move forward, who we want to make richer, right? And this also happens in time. Like, if you give somebody time, and since we're quantifying our time as to equal to money, that says a lot, right? So, we affect the world with that power. Most of us don't even realize it. We're not even fully conscious of it, right? And to me, that is fucking crazy because it's true more than not. Okay? Now, I will speak in fucking vague language because I don't necessarily look at the minutiae and the details because I think they're usually stocked with double speak and bullshit. I am looking at the cause and effect, the ripple effects, right? And there's data that suggests inconspicuous consumption. Like, I think it's the name of a book. And we kind of do that, right? But we're not fully aware of it. We're only maddening by the idea that inflation or whatever nonsense that they kind of give us, right? But we never actually have a full measurement of it. And if you just fucking putted through high school or school in general, because after a certain point in time, you start feeling like school's a fucking jail bid, right? It's an indirect quote of Bismarck. That's a thing, right? And what happens is you become resistant towards it. My advice to younger people, really young people, I work with a lot of kids over time, is you really want to fuck everything up. Like, yeah, fucking, yeah. Okay, actually invest in the model, right? Put your time and effort into the model, and you will distinguish whether it's bullshit or not. And what happens is the model gets fucked up by you doing that because they're expecting you not to, because you have many, many years of the larger population resisting it, right? And there's a lot there to unpack, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to put it up there, let it float in the air, and let that sit. I will remind you, I don't care about your fucking comments. Don't. You can put them up there. If others see, shit, you guys can go back and forth and have discussions about, like, dingleberries. I don't care. I'm putting this out there based on the idea that this makes sense to me. And if it wasn't for a bunch of people saying, you need to put this argument forward, or these arguments forward, or this tapestry of shit, right, for the world to look at, then I wouldn't be doing this. I will remind you about the first episode. So, my initial episode was going to be about Black Sabbath, because I think Black Sabbath is fucking important. There's actually a lot of things I think are important. And I kind of get overlooked because time goes on and the corporate end wants to sell you product. This product is just to make their bottom line. The general push is new. Is the new in time. Every so often they'll look at older things and repackage them and rework them. Don't get me wrong. I think corporations and businesses have a purpose. I'm not anti that. What I'm against is the overstepping and just complete push for control. There needs to be genuine pushback by citizenry, right? We need to select things, and that's what essentially this episode's about. So there's certain things I touch on, like paintings and movies and just the arts in general, right? The arts are basically the capturing of thoughts and feelings from people that are touched enough to look at everything and go, this is the way I think things are. And they share it with other people. And the commodification of that is a thing that happens. You got to make money if you have talent or if they like a particular way you do things, right? That's the weird thing about it, right? You have an appreciation for stuff. And the goal for the companies is just to make the money off of it as best as possible. But sometimes not sometimes, all the times they overstep and just try to dominate what they feel your interest should be. Okay, so Black Sabbath for me is extremely important because they changed a lot of things in the greater culture, meaning the culture beyond the United States' borders. You know, there's a lot of artists that just influenced internationally, globally, and they did that. getting back to the vote with your dollar thing, right? So why I decided to have this as episode 2 rather than the Black Sabbath episode is that I want to explain to you that you have that power. You have the power to select what you want to see in everyday society, right? And you have the responsibility to recognize when you're being manipulated to get the new, right? And you may not like it. Like, I do not like country music. Just don't like it. I know it's a dominant thing right now. I know people are making a lot of money off of it. Does not interest me whatsoever. I don't even have a love for music that tries to mirror rock and roll, right? And back in the day, country music kind of did that a little. Not saying I don't like particular artists. I do. And actually, I have respect for them not even liking the catalog, right? Like the Dolly Partons of the world, right? The Willie Nelsons, right? You got to have respect for it because they gave a lot to our culture. And I'm not saying the modern artists don't. I just don't particularly like it. But there's a lot of marketing towards me for it, and just not interested, right? So I dig, but I learned to dig. I'm Gen X, so we learn to seek things out, and I think with a computer, it made a lot of people lazy because they assume, well, the computer has been around not that long. It existed, but it was in such a weird ass form, non-user friendly. It wasn't in every household. So we had to learn how to seek this shit out, right? And that right there is essentially the heavy concept of like voting with your dollar. Like you're like, well, you're not necessarily spending money. No, you typically would spend money. Sometimes not. Sometimes you actually find things for free, and some people just don't want it anymore, and so on and so forth. So you negotiate trade, or you get it for free. One of the two. But time is money. We are automatically taught this, and I think that fucks us up in the long run. This internalization of this 60-minute, 100-minute unit, 100-unit hour thing. Actually, I want to touch one more thing about that, right? So we pay money out on a day-to-day basis, right? We have a tendency to touch back on this, to not realize where the phrasing "cog in a machine." It's figurative to a certain degree. Like, oh well, yeah, we're not a physical cog, right? But we do serve a function. And that function is essentially we help distribute capital. We do it as long as we work. If money's flowing into our hands or paying for our ways, we are choosing where that money goes. Some of it we have no say, right? Like the larger one, taxes. We have say, but we have to work the system. But they made sure that system is very complicated, right? We would have to collectively, as a large body of people, get our senators, a congressman to, or congressperson to give us tax breaks, abolish certain things, right? Change the tax, right? Maybe we don't spend too much money in this and more money in that, right? If you're wondering why Congress is probably all jacked up like that, it's because the people that make large amounts of money don't want that changed. So, okay, there's a level of powerlessness there. But it's weird because we do have that power. But we seem to be very divided, right? And that's sad. But with that power, when we seem helpless there, I want to tell you, as a person in the normal everyday, you still have power, right? This equation of your minute work, is money spent. You turn on the lights in your house, turn on the water. That equation is a thing, right? When that equation gets fucked up is when your minute pay or unit pay does not equate to the cost taken out of you. Just for everyday stuff, like from shelter, clothing, food. And oddly enough, unfortunately, gas, which is, I think, a discussion for another point in time. Like fuel, vehicles, that's a weird conversation, right? But you're doing the job, right? You're going in, you're grinding, you're working the hours, and you're trying to make that equation work for you. What you're trying to keep yourself out of is survival mode, right? And survival mode is not living. And your goal is to make enough to pay for everything to have a level of reprieve, right? Now, some people will offset this, right? Like rent is so high in this country that, and that's really people projecting further and overreaching. Make no mistake, because there's lots of land. Maybe not as much in the cities, but there is, right? And like it bothered me when I lived in down south that people were paying a lot of money for houses in these small, what they call communities, and there would be tons of land all over the place. I'm like, how are you spending this much money, for this house that looks like shit, to live in it, to be tethered to it, and there's land all around you. That's probably cheaper. But you could probably get a better deal building your own house. I don't necessarily understand this concept, right? But ready-made, people aren't going to stop their lives to do all this stuff, and that's another conversation, right? The whole culture of acceleration. I promise you, I'm not trying to make this about this. There's certain things I feel you need to understand how I look at them to understand why I'm going to talk about the odds the way I'm going to talk about the odds, right? So we pay more out, more likely at the similar rate that we get if we live in the grid. The grid meaning the larger system. We have the apartment, we live in the city, we do all the stuff there, right? Some people have just decided, I'm going to figure out how to not pay for all of that. And that's partially off grid, right? Living out of their vehicles, living in a camp, living wherever, right? The cost of this is, if everything keeps going the way it's going, this is probably going to be a thing that's going to be greater in the future, right? Because I don't necessarily see rents going down. And the argument over hourly pay is just crazy. Like, we're now starting to get ahead, at least having some disposable income, and we have enough people overreaching with their prices, right? And there's a bunch of reasons why. I'm not going to get into it. But the thing I'm going to get into is the partial jumping off grid, at least to live your life, right? That changes the number, right? That means you're not paying out as much as you're getting in, right? It seems desperate, but it kind of makes sense. Right? I'm not necessarily going to criticize somebody for doing that. The slower rate, if you live off the grid, only off the grid, with the idea that the person is still working a daily job, is a thing that you benefit from, right? I'm reading off notes again. Sorry. Completely off the grid is what a whole other concept. Like the idea of just not working and going back to a baser way of living that is not normal, right? It's outside of the norm. But I can understand that. But to be clear, I need to be clear about this. That is freedom embraced to a certain degree. Freedom, in my opinion, is taking responsibility for your actions, right? You can pretty much do anything as long as you are willing to pay the cost. And sometimes, not all the time, is it negative. And most of the time it is. But you have to countermeasure everything. When you live in this society, a construct, there is a thinking that, well, the anti-society thing, right? But there's costs. If you remove yourself from that society, you put yourself in the middle of nowhere, you still have costs to pay, even though society is no longer under that umbrella. You're still under the umbrella of life and nature. So you have to figure out how to maneuver that better, right? I'm not getting into that fully. That's just a synopsis, like just a quick bloop. Because I'm just talking about the day-to-day being a worker. Right? We have the position that seems to be unrecognized, and it seems to be a position of power. Our ability to go to work and do work, and get paid for it, and then, transfer that wealth gradually into the system is a position of power. The people that don't transfer the wealth into the system are usually people that are really well off. They do it, but it's stingy in a way. Sometimes they pay it differently, get paid differently. But it's interesting. I'm not going to get into that. I'm going to get into just the working class, right? So we have this position. It is a cog position, right? The portion of our capital is translated to a specific rate. So essentially, we are that cog. But it's not, okay, we're not a physical cog in a larger machine. That is an abstraction. That's like a metaphor. But we are doing a function within the greater construct. There is probably tons of literature on this. It probably falls under the economic department, right? I know nothing about that. I'm going to be straightforward with you. This is me now analyzing a day-to-day function. I've worked several jobs for many years. And I realized that the only way to kind of counter everything is to overwork or to get paid more, right? But I always like the comfort of overworking. Like if you do that, then when problems start going off, you're kind of prepared for it, right? We're given 168 hours in a week, and we already spent 40 on some man's time, right? Some person's time. And they don't necessarily give you the heads up about this when you're younger. Maybe you were lucky to have the parents to kind of teach at least some concept of this, right? They prepare you for the workforce to a certain degree, but they don't really explain to you your function, right? A lot of the stuff, the consumer stuff, is done without realizing how much power you have, right? And selection is very big. Choice is very big, right? A lot of people are not aware of this when they're younger. So when they go into the world, just trying to learn the basic mechanics of how to survive on a day-to-day basis is crazy enough. So to stop and think, what is the better choice, is a thing, right? If you learn something that's fucked up already, you're already at a disadvantage. By the time you realize you just done fucked up, it could be 5 to 10 years into your adult life, right? The rate of our cost of existence in the greater system, when it is unbalanced and off, it automatically puts the person in survival mode. Anxiety, depression, like a lot of things that I know kind of fall into the psychology thing, but if it's happening at a larger rate, you kind of wonder, right? That survival mode is not healthy at all. I've been in that many times. It's just difficult, right? And with that, you're short-term thinking. Like maybe you'll, just consume a lot more food, alcohol, substances, whores, whatever the fuck situation you got going on, right? In order to help band-aid that perpetual stress. This generates an incentive to work more, right? To get you out of that survival mode, right? Maybe get your head, get enough to not feel that way, right? Because the more money you're thinking is, like, even with the lottery idea, like, if I have more money, then I have freedom away from that stress. But the process of being in that machine itself is something that should be, I'm basically telling you to analyze, right? I want you to understand that you have that power. All this elaborate, like, unit, minute, you on a day-to-day basis have that power. And I want to make you aware of it. And anybody that tells you don't is full of shit. Okay? You make these decisions. You can change these decisions at any point in time. You can select other, right? Because you essentially, by having the income come in whatever form, and you're disseminating it through bills, through choices in cars and dinners and so on and so forth, you are making a choice to go in certain directions, right? You are channeling your capital to the businesses, thus explaining my critique of businesses, right? They serve a function. Don't get me wrong. I don't think they should have personhood, but they serve a function, right? They are beloved. There's many businesses I absolutely love, and I'm happy they exist. And this is why I decide to give them my money, right? They serve the purpose in which they serve, right? So cash equals cash to live. And that's based on needs, right? Again, there is probably a large fucking body of literature explaining this, right? It's probably under accounting or economics. Guarantee this exists. I would probably turn around and fucking pick somebody's brain on this to get proper terminology. But it's funny because each discipline has its own terms. I'm literally trying to choose the correct terms in order to articulate my point because I see this point. And I want you to recognize this point, right? Disposable cash is the cash designed to typically reduce pressure. It allows you to buy your wants. It seemed to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you say it in the comments, I'm not going to give a fuck, but, I'm just saying that in general as a figurative speech, right? The last 5 years, 6 years, we'll even go that far back, right? The workers that kept going stepped up, right? And there was a bunch of things changed. Actually, I want to even mock it. It would change in 2012, 2013, right? Definitely by 2014. And I want to say most communities became more shifted towards the employee-based economy, like meaning that we started getting more money per hour because work was growing and they didn't have enough employees, specifically competent employees, right? People that actually want to go above and beyond to work. And it seems like the more disposable income we had, the scarier things got for whomever. Because with the more disposable income we have, the more choices we can make, right? So every so often I'll talk to a relative or a friend that will just talk about box stores in regards to vote you with your dollar. Like, these people invest in box. Yeah, you know what? In survival mode, the cheapest wins, right? That's what you're thinking. And I agree with you. Uh, in that corner, the vote with your dollar thing kind of goes sideways. The idea that we have disposable income and we now can select what we want to see and feel and wear and look at is powerful. That means we gained more power and more footing. And the threat now seems to be, wait, now we want to control and channel that more of that capital back into the things necessities, right? And that seems to be the larger overreach right now. The scramble, how I interpret the scramble, because that's all it really is most of the time, interpretation. Because you're watching behavior and watching the ripple effect, right? Like we gain more money, then mysteriously everything goes up in price. And they look at it that, oh, well, we can now increase these prices for your day to day. The things that you need, right? That's problematic. Because now you're literally saying we want to force you back into survival mode. Right? You started making too much money off of us. That's disturbing. But it also, on the flip side, recognizes that your dollar vote is a thing. Your ability to have capital and decide where you want to spend it is a thing. It's a very powerful thing, right? And I want you to analyze this equation, right? And there's probably a lot more. Again, accounting economics is where you want to go with this, even just the basic stuff. Because there's probably more to do than this, right? I'm not a big fan of owning houses. Just not. And I know that goes against traditional thinking. But I am a fan of having the idea of what you're going to do with your stuff, right? The things you personalize, the things you create. I'm even more of a fan of you creating, right? The idea of you thinking about things and drawing things out and writing things down and creating. Because if you have the feel for that, that means there's some thoughts going on there. And let's say they're primitive. Let's say they're fucked up. They're not right, or it doesn't matter. Like, humans need to communicate with other humans and do it in the forms you feel comfortable with and you want to expand on. But that also goes with that luxury time, right? That time when you have enough money to go get what they want, or the downtime from work. That's a whole other story for another time. The reason why I'm presenting to you this concept of voting with your dollar. You want to see that comic book? You want to see that magazine? You want to say, fuck you, streamings, right? And stop buying the albums again? Buy the fucking albums. The artist makes more money from the album, right? Go see this show, right? If that television show is on and you think it's a piece of shit, shut the fucking television off. They get ad revenue, right? Make the selections you want in life. Put the money and the time, which is equated to money, into the things you want more of, right? That's the thing. I'm here to tell you right now, you have that fucking power. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Because they're fucking lying to you, or they haven't thought about it. One of the two. Right? So, this vote with your dollar idea, I'm telling you before I get into the odds. Now you're going to be like, oh, now you're going to sell me on ideas. This Black Sabbath concept. I'm 10 years old. Why the fuck would I listen to Black Sabbath? Right? First of all, you're 10 years old. I just swore at you. I apologize for that. God forbid if you hear from me, because you're going to hear from everybody else, right? It's not necessarily like that. Because there's certain things that exist that you can get access to. But when you go to appreciate them, you should probably give them some of your capital. Why? Because they need to exist because they gave you something and provided something for you. You're like, well, they didn't give me a steak or a cup of coffee. Or you're right. And those places should be equally as appreciated. That dope ass food, fucking go, dude. You know? You want to know why chains are popular? Because the consistency. They just realized that's a thing. And consistency is a building block. And that's a whole other fucking line of thinking. But that's the truth. That's why they thrived. Right? And when they don't have enough employees because they're not paying enough, or they fuck up their chain or their structure, they want you to pay more. Or they want you to deal with the inconvenience of the inconsistencies of their stores that they built their whole structure off. So mom and pops, right? Or Fred in his van. You know, I'm all for that too. But you have that ability. And before I get into the larger odds, I want to make you aware of this. I'm going to highlight things. You choose if you're going to spend the money on them. Right? But I wanted you to understand that it is a choice. You know, outside of the food, clothing, and shelter, right? Which I think every fucking state should be tax-free, right? The extra stuff is choice, right? And that's it. That's all I'm saying in this episode. I just spent 40-something minutes telling you this, right? But when I'm giving you the other stuff, I now don't have to go back to this. And that's what a luxury was. Like, I realized when I talk to people that, first of all, there's an argument for talking app. Okay? If I'm calling you, first of all, in the modern times, if I'm fucking calling you, that means I have an argument in my head I need to get out. That I need you to help me to process, right? Or there's something I'm trying to give you, or there's a favor I need, so on and so forth. Because the everyday conversations usually happen on the grid, because we know we have a grid for that. And that's via texting and messaging and emails and all that shit, right? Imagine at one point in time, if you told somebody back in 1979 that people could have records, miles and miles and miles of records of information shared, intangible text. It'd be like, why? Why don't you just call them up or fucking go to their house? Yeah, we get slowly married into that idea, right? I don't necessarily begrudge it, right? But it's still a fucking, just a 180-degree spin that you kind of have to recognize. So rather than me talking at you and coming at you sideways with the internal narrative already being unleashed, I'm trying to put these things strategically in place, right? And that's what episode 2 is about. You have power. You generate the capital, you disperse the capital. And if you have disposable capital, you even have more power, right? Just saying. Any which way. I'm not sure what episode 3 is going to be. Episode 2 is supposed to be about Black Sabbath. Episode 3 might be about that. It might be episode 4. I guess we'll see. Till next time.